Penguin Random House Audio presents The Pleasure Shock, The Rise of Deep Brain Stimulation and Its Forgotten Inventor, by Lona Frank. Read for you by Cassandra Campbell. If it was possible to become free of negative emotions by a riskless implementation of an electrode, without impairing intelligence and the critical mind, I would be the first patient. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Society for Neuroscience Congress, November 2005. Prologue. The doctors tell him to forget all about the wires. There are 4 of them, dragging from the back of his head to the floor and under a thick curtain into the next room. Ignore them, the doctors say. Relax. Concentrate on the task at hand. That won't be easy. He's never been with a woman before. And though they've been aiming for this moment, this encounter, for months, he can't shake the thought. This feels utterly wrong. He glances around. The doctors have done the best they could with the sterile white room. They've put up some curtains and laid out a few rugs to give it something of a homey ambiance. They've also softened the harsh overhead lights, which helps put him at a slightly greater ease. Of course, they've placed a bed in the room, even if it's just a regular white metal frame hospital model. He can't avoid seeing her, sitting there on the bed covers. She pats them politely and invites him to sit down beside her. He knows it is more like a summons, a requirement of his involvement in this experiment. He collects his wires and drags himself over to the bedside. They have 2 hours. That's how much time she's been paid for, he's been told. She tells him to relax. Take it easy. There's no rush. Why doesn't he start by telling her a little about himself? He considers her more closely now. She has already taken off her dress, but fortunately she still has her undergarments on. She tells him that she's just turned 21, but he senses that she is somehow older than her years. He's 24, but right now he feels much younger, less experienced. He has a hard time looking her in the eye. When he finally manages to speak, he addresses the room, softly at first, then with more force. It's as if everything, his whole life, comes pouring out of him at once. The problems with his family, the drugs, his covert meetings with older men, the disgust he feels for what he is, and for what he is not. As he talks, the woman moves closer, and though he does not notice when or how, she slips off her bra. It's lying on the floor like a deflated balloon. It's uncomfortable to look at her naked body, but also strangely exhilarating. Finally, he senses the thing that brought him here. That feeling the scientists have managed to give him over the months he has been coming to the lab. A wave of warmth. Is it desire? Spreads downward and tugs at him. He thinks the experiment may be working, and this gives him the courage to stretch a hand out to her. He fixes his eyes on the pattern of one of the curtains, lets his fingers come into contact with her unfamiliar body. Her skin is surprisingly warm, softer and more yielding than what he is used to. He registers a few syllables of her voice and lets his hands roam. Now it becomes a kind of dance, one that dances itself. But every so often he is struck by a thought, almost as if someone is prodding him on the shoulder, telling him, urging him, to keep going. Intermittently, he remembers the wires and the room next door. There are 4 people in that room, and they are observing everything he does, recording every movement he makes, though they can neither see nor hear him, at least not directly. Right now, they are focused intently on the readings from the 9 electrodes placed deep within his brain. With each movement of his hand, each sensation of skin on skin, signals from a densely packed area of gray matter run through the cables into the doctor's sensitive devices. Initially, as I read the account of the experiment with B-19, I thought it was a sick joke, a parody of mad scientists run amok. But the more I read, it became clear. A psychiatrist had actually tried to convert a homosexual man to heterosexual preferences through brain stimulation, and both the doctor and his patient genuinely wanted the experiment to succeed. Electrodes had been implanted in the man's pleasure center and were stimulated while the man underwent a monitored session with a female prostitute. As unlikely, not to mention unethical, as the experiment seemed, the original article filled 7 pages of an academic journal, the Journal of Behavioral Therapy and Experimental Psychiatry, in 1972. It was all there, in black and white, though the text and graphs left a lot to the imagination. The language of the paper was sober and academic, which made it all the more jarring. Pleasure has long been known to be a primary reinforcing condition for acquiring and establishing behavior in animals and man, the preamble stated matter-of-factly. Over the past several years, considerable interest has also fastened on the fact that a pleasurable response can be induced by direct activation of the brain, and raised hopes that this might be applied to the treatment of disordered human behavior. Were they really exploring a treatment for sexual orientation a few years after the Stonewall riots kicked off the gay liberation movement? Yet the scientific logic was rigorous and stringent. The treatment regimen was subtle and sophisticated. The encounter between the patient and his treatment, the prostitute, was designed as if it were normal lab practice. In the same terse medical language, the paper provided a dry diagnostic sketch of the experimental subject. Patient B-19 is a 24-year-old single white male of unremarkable gestation and birth whose immediate family consists of parents, age 55, and a sister, 19. It began. But this laconic introduction belied the wretched circumstances of the patient's life. B-19's mother was a cold fish. In fact, B-19 could not remember receiving a single hug as he grew up. But his father was even worse. The man was an alcoholic, a violent, quick-tempered tyrant who was chronically disappointed in his depraved son. B-19 could muster positive feelings only for his sister, the only person with whom he felt comfortable sharing worries and disappointments. B-19 seemed normally gifted, perhaps even above average, according to the psychiatrists. But he had suffered several suicide attempts and hospitalizations since his teen years, and was fixated on his past mistakes and deficiencies, so much so that he struggled to put his psychological life in order. He was a hypochondriac and horribly afraid of pain and dying. He could not tolerate criticism of any kind, could barely stand being with other people, and felt isolated from the world around him. Moreover, B-19 was apathetic, suffered from chronic boredom, lacked motivation, and generally had a deep-seated sense that he was wrong, valueless, and useless. Paradoxically, B-19 was also convinced he was quite special, a person God would reward for having endured so many cruel difficulties. The extent of his paranoia fluctuates situationally, but is often of true psychotic proportion, the paper concluded. Finally, there was his sexuality. That was what B-19 blamed for his desire to take his own life. He had dropped out of high school and joined the military, hoping to make a fresh start in life, but was discharged after only a month for his homosexual tendencies. For a few years afterward, he roamed the country, hooking up with a variety of men. By the time he walked into the lab to have the cables attached to his head, B-19 was telling the psychiatrists that he was disgusted by himself and was no longer capable of experiencing happiness or pleasure from anything.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?